Last week, or I should say a week ago, this past Wednesday, I flew to Pasco to visit my daughter Kelly and her son Cody. I had been invited over there specifically because Cody's a senior in high school, and his high school choir was singing in their winter concert, and I'd heard him sing in church before at the feast, not solo, but with groups. But she asked me if, I'd like to come and hear him, and so I thought I'd take that opportunity. And also Kelly had moved to a different place, and I'd never been there to see her new home, and also gave me an opportunity to see two of her daughters, Natasha and Alexis' baby, Brianna. So it was a little bit of a family mini reunion as well. Unfortunately, on Thursday, when the concert was to be held, it snowed. And it wasn't a lot of snow, and I was really surprised because, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 inches, but it was very slushy, and also it was very cold. And, as the sun went down and the evening came on, they anticipated a lot of really treacherous roads. So unfortunately, the main purpose for my going over to visit was to see his concert was canceled at the last minute. Anyway, I'd planned to be here last Sabbath anyway, and so I spent Thursday and Friday there visiting with Kelly and her children, my great-granddaughter. And then Saturday morning, I woke up about 4:30, and Kelly took me to the airport. Fortunately, it was very close to where she lived. It was only about a 15-minute drive, and the roads were fine. So I got there around 5. I went through security, checked in. We sat around in the lobby. And about 5:25, they started calling out for people to board the plane. So we, got on the plane. Everyone got on. They closed the door. The overhead bins were closed. The first engine fired up, and then the second one fired up. And, they stood there warming up. There were these turboprops. It was Horizon Air, and they had these small planes, 2 on each side of the aisle. There were probably 80 to 90 people on the plane. I'm not sure of the exact number. But anyway, the engines went for a few minutes, and then all of a sudden, one shut down. A few seconds later, the other one, I could hear it, winding down. And then the captain came on the intercom. He says, "Well, folks," he says, "there's a white light on the panel that doesn't seem to want to go out. And we're not going to move the plane until that white light's out. We can't figure what it is, so we're going to have a crew come on here and find out what's wrong." I told one of the passengers later on when we were talking about this, well, I'm glad that they have that kind of concern, because I'd much rather they find out here when the plane's on the ground than we find out when we're digging ourselves out of a snowbank someplace in the Cascades or out of the trees up there. But anyway, the captain said, "Well, we'll probably, this maybe it'll take an hour and a half, and we should be on our way at 7:30. So we all dutifully got off, went back to the waiting room. About 7:30, I noticed that the time had changed to 8. So I thought, well, it's probably taking a little longer. Nothing was said. There were no announcements. And about 8 o'clock, or a little after 8, there were still no announcements, but I think it was around 8:20, I looked up at the sign and it said flight canceled. So I thought, well, maybe I was thinking originally, I'd take a 6 o'clock flight. It's a 50-minute flight to Seattle. I get there at 7. I had my suit, my briefcase, and everything in the car. From 7 to Woodinville, there was a 3-hour time span that I should have been able to make church. That was my intent. The interesting thing was that Mr. Holliday had called me emailed me late Friday afternoon and said he wasn't really feeling too well. And he said, do you think you could speak for me? And I said, well, and I've been able to do this usually when people call me fairly short notice, because if I have my computer and Bible and everything else there right at my fingertips, I'm usually able to do something. But I said, I'm over in Pasco visiting my children and grandchildren, and I don't know if I should, I don't want to put you on a spot and tell you I'll commit to something that I can't follow through. And I said, especially since it's snowing over here, and they had a concert cancellation because of the weather. So I said, I don't think that I don't want to do it. Maybe you ought to find someone else. Well, as it turned out, he sent me an email Saturday morning or later telling me that he had felt better and he was just going to push through it. So that worked out really well. Anyway, as I said, the flight was canceled. And so, of course, everyone was concerned. What are we going to do? Here you have a plane that has 80 passengers, and all of a sudden, they're going to need flights to Seattle. And this is a time of year, because of the holidays, and everyone in the world's traveling, so there are very, very few openings. Anyway, I was about the 18th person in line, and you have to understand this line moved very slowly, and sometimes a person at the head of the line, and they only had one attendant trying to follow up on the reservations. Sometimes a person could take up to 15 minutes, because if they were trying to make a connection in Seattle, they not only had to deal with this disrupted flight, but also their connection in Seattle. So it wasn't an easy fix, is what I'm saying. Anyway, I remember there were a couple of young teenage girls standing in front of me, probably 16 and 17. And one of them, the older one, was on the phone talking, and I could see she was gradually getting agitated, and pretty soon she was starting to cry, and pretty soon she was sobbing, and I could tell she was trying to explain to someone in Seattle why she couldn't be there for whatever reason she was supposed to be there. I don't know if it was her parents, if it was her boyfriend, or what the reason was. In back of me, there was a middle-aged man who was on the phone on his cell phone too, calling various airlines, trying to figure out how he was going to get to Kona, or how he was going to get to his connecting flight in Seattle so he could go to Kona. And I know someone said, I heard him said, "You mean you could take me, but it'll cost me $1,100 one way?" The fare from Pasco to Seattle. And obviously he didn't take that, because that normally is, like $200 or $150, whatever. But in any event, he was talking to someone else on the phone, and they said, well, if you can get to Seattle, we'll book you a flight to Boise, and from there we can get you a connecting flight to Kona. So the reason that I'm mentioning all this is it really, showed to me how disruptive it is when just one plane gets canceled. And I thought about all of the times that, and this happens particularly in Seattle, and a lot of times in November and December, when the weather is not only bad here, but bad in other parts of the country, and you get many, many cancellations, like in New York or Washington, D.C. or Detroit, that type of thing. And when those planes don't reach Seattle, it backs up everything, because the passengers that are supposed to leave Seattle are stuck there and spend 2 or 3 days sometimes sleeping in the airport. And, you've all seen pictures like that on television before, but this gave me a little better appreciation for that. And the funny thing was, this wasn't a cancellation because of weather, which is first what I thought it was going to be. It was simply a mechanical failure. Well, in any event, there was a flight at 9:30, a flight at 11:30, a flight at 1:30. They were all delayed, and I finally got on the one at 1:30, which didn't leave until 2:20, like the others before. Because, like I said, this threw everything out of kilter, because the plane that was leaving, that I was supposed to be on, was one of the ones shuttling to Seattle and coming back, taking a later flight, which didn't happen. So it caused all kinds of confusion. And I was very glad that I had told David what I told him, especially when the way things turned out. You learn lessons from experiences like this. The one major lesson I learned is I'm not taking any more December flights, especially when the weather can be so tentative. And the other thing, and I didn't even think about this when I booked it at first. I was coming back on the weekend before Christmas. And see, to me, the Christmas is like a non-event. When you've been in the church as long as I have, and the way we treat Christmas, and it comes and goes. So I don't think about it. I didn't think of it in terms of the people traveling. So many people were, when something like this happens, you've just got that many more people vying for the empty seats they're trying to fill. Well, this, in a way, is kind of the way life is. There's always something that we didn't expect, something that we didn't anticipate, something just around the bend in our lives. Our lives are not static by any means. We're told that time and chance happens to all of us. And that is a very true statement. We face things we didn't plan for, and suddenly you have this problem in front of you, and you're forced to deal with it and discover what are you going to do for the solution. As we head into a new year, and with the uncertainty of what may lie in store ahead of us, we need to examine a basic biblical principle that can be and will be a major help to us as we face the vagaries of life. We are told to count the cost of our actions. And these, may not only be measured, the effects of our actions may not be measured in dollars and cents or in time loss, but in many other ways as well. The way we affect other people, the way we affect our friends, the way we affect our children, the way we affect our spouses, the way we affect our next door neighbor. Everything that we do has a ripple effect and has an impact on everyone else in our life, the people that we work with, our bosses, our coworkers. What are some of the questions you are trying to find the answers for at this time in your life? And have you counted the cost in arriving at that decision, whatever decision it is you finally feel is the right answer? Should I marry Tom, or should I marry Tony? Should I marry Susie or marry Sally? Oh, you put your own names in there. Should I move to New Orleans, or should I move to Anchorage? And after my experience, Anchorage would be my absolute last choice. Not that I have anything against Anchorage. I spent a week up there one winter in January. The bank sent me up there to help with a group going through some records of a newly acquired bank. But it wouldn't be my favorite choice. But in any event, maybe you're considering quitting a job with Boeing and perhaps going to work for Weyerhaeuser, or going to work for Microsoft, or going into business for yourself with all the risks that are associated with doing something like that, rather than staying in a secure and safe income. I mean, there are all kinds of things you can be looking at. Should I retire? Should I take an early retirement? Should I go to college? Should I go to work? You know, whatever it is, we need to be here every week to get our questions answered and receive the help we need to live a satisfying life in the world we live in today, while we're in the process of working toward, while we're in the process of the goal we have of living an eternal life in the world tomorrow. We need to thoughtfully, carefully, prayerfully consider all the ramifications of the decisions we're considering and what will occur depending upon the choices we make. You know, one of the reasons for doing this is that we tend basically to be pretty optimistic when it comes to the time, most of the time regarding our own decisions. We have an uncanny way of finding all kinds of rationalizations, all kinds of ways, all kinds of reasons to justify in our own minds why we make the decisions and why we make the choices we make. You know, it's easy for us to sell ourselves on our own choices because we tend to paint things with the proverbial rose-colored glasses and look at our choices in their most optimistic and positive light. The problem with doing this is that we don't leave ourselves any leeway at all for the unexpected, for the unforeseen, for the delayed flights. And if we don't do this, we can sometimes end up with disastrous and even catastrophic results. Is it any wonder that we sometimes find ourselves hanging out on a limb physically, financially, emotionally, spiritually, because we neglected to count the costs? Turn to Proverbs 22, verse 3. Proverbs 22, verse 3. A prudent man foreseeth the evil. You know, someone that is really thinking, someone who is looking down the road ahead, someone who has foresight, takes the time and sees the evil. He understands the consequences of where he's going. And it says, and hides himself. He's not afraid to turn around and walk away from something that he knows is not right. He's not afraid to hide from someone if he feels he's being threatened. He's not afraid to say no. No, I'm not going to do it, whatever it is. And I won't use the examples. You can come up with your own. The prudent man looks down the road, this wide road we're talking about. It goes one way or it can go the other, somewhere down the line. And if you're barreling down that road 100 miles an hour, you're not going to see that car coming out from nowhere that T-bones you, and you know what happens. That's the type of thing. The prudent man foresees the potential for both the good and the bad. But the simple pass on and are punished. They pay for the consequences of their actions. They pay for not looking ahead. They pay for not taking into consideration what the consequences may be. Not here right now, but 300 yards down the road, or 1,000 yards down the road, or 2 days down the road, or a month down the road, or a half a year down the road, or a couple of years down the road. You don't know where that consequence will be felt. It may occur with your children. They may be the ones that feel the end result of the decision that you made at this time. The simple pass on and are punished. You know, it's interesting, the word plan is not found anywhere in the Old or New Testament in the King James Version, as far as I could tell or find. But I'm sure that you're all well aware that that doesn't mean that we're excused from planning in our lives. You know, that's obvious. Jesus emphasized this in Luke 14:28. Luke 14, verse 28. Well-known example. You've been in the church for a while. You've read this hundreds of times, probably. Every time a person's counseled for baptism, this set of scriptures is used to help the person make a decision, to understand the consequences, to help them in their own mind resolve the importance of the step they're about to take. Luke 14, verse 28. Which of you, intending to build a tower, sits not down first and counts the cost? You know, if you go out here to build a house, if you're the builder, you have to determine how long it's going to take to lay the foundation, how much cement it's going to take, depending upon the size of the house. You have to know what needs to be completed so the plumbers can do their job, what needs to be completed so the electricians can do their job. And there are a variety of things associated with building a house. And you can project that into the building of a skyscraper and the immense responsibility of putting everything together so that project finishes on time. And as an aside, I just heard that Bertha is in the process of running again, and I was thinking that I imagine there are going to be a lot of, I don't know if lawsuits will be involved or not, but insurance companies involved in figuring and computing the losses of time that machine was not running. So you have to count the cost. You can't just willy-nilly go out and decide to do something. Whether he have sufficient to finish it. So if you start a project and you're 6 months down the road and you run out of money, verse 29, here's what happens. Less happily after he hath laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, begin to laugh at him, begin to say to him, maybe if not to his face, behind his back, you thought you were so smart, thinking you could finish this, and you thinking you could do this, and see how it ended up. Continuing, verse 31, or what king going to make war against another king sitteth not down first? And this is rather interesting if you think about this. You know, there are people who will charge ahead without giving a thought to the consequences of what they're doing. Jesus is indicating here that, you need to sit down. You need to, in a relaxed fashion. You don't need a lot of pressure on you to finish whatever it is you're doing, and particularly if you're going to war, where you've got consequences of mammoth proportions, especially when you're dealing with 10,000, as we see in the latter part of the verse. You sit down first. And there's a second thing that you're told to do here. You don't independently, arbitrarily make decisions just based on your own independent judgment, because for sure that's going to get you in trouble. Sits not down first, and what? Consulteth. Who does that person consult in this case? Well, he consults the people skilled in warfare, the people under him, the people who know what the 10,000 are capable of doing under the conditions. If snow's on the ground, that's going to affect them. If they can't move, if they're in hills, whatever it is, you have to consult with people who are knowledgeable before you make these decisions. If you've got a medical problem going on in your family, with you or someone in your family, you get a second opinion, maybe a third opinion, as the case may be. But you consult with someone else, someone who's more knowledgeable, someone who's more experienced. And in this case, whether he be able to, with 10,000, to meet him that cometh against him with 20,000, where the odds are 2-1. What do you think on the surface? That doesn't look too promising. And because of that, or else while the other is yet a great way off, he sends an ambassage of and desirous conditions of peace. Which obviously, in looking at that again on the surface, is the logical thing to do. If you've got twice as many people more than you have, those odds aren't very good. Well, with 2016 looming, you hear many people talk, about New Year's resolutions. The reality is how many of those are kept. Very few. From your own experience, from the people around you, from the people that you hear talking about resolutions. In the world, if you're in the world, you go out and you have a few drinks on New Year's Eve and have a good time, and you decide with your buddies, hey, let's go on a diet. Let's start an exercise program. Let's run, 30 minutes a day or so, whatever. And of course, a lot of these are well-intentioned, nursed on, of course, with a few drinks, but most have not been really generated by a well-thought-out plan. Any significant change in our lives has to be preceded by a well-thought-out plan. That plan is important to see what did we just discuss if we have counted the cost, to see if what it is we're about to embark on, if we have the physical, if we have the emotional, if we have the spiritual reserves to follow through and reach our goal. Turn to 1 Timothy 6, verse 6. 1 Timothy 6, beginning in verse 6. These two verses, or two or three verses, are some of my favorites, and I'll explain why. But godliness with contentment is great gain. You don't need a lot of things to have a content and to have a satisfying life. Things cause problems. Things take up time. Things can be distracting. And sometimes less is more. Sometimes the fewer things we have, the better off we are, and particularly if we are trying to lead a godly life. For we brought nothing into this world, and it's certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. Food and raiment. I don't know how many of you here have any kind of debt at all, but I would guess, without any hesitation, saying that I bet probably very little of that debt's associated with food and raiment. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be in debt to buy something major like a house or an automobile, that type of thing. That's the American way of life. But if you think about a lot of the other things that go into your life and what you're paying for, I'm sure that it's not food and raiment. Now, there may be some that is why they have to go in debt. I hope not in our congregation. When I was in grade school, I saw a picture, and I don't remember if it was in a class or where exactly it was. But it was a picture of a beautiful snow-covered valley with pine trees, on the sides of the mountain. And right down at the bottom of the valley was this little log cabin, very small log cabin, with a wisp of smoke coming out of the smokestack. And I don't know why, even at my young age, I thought that just exuded happiness and contentment. And I could imagine people inside sitting in front of a log fire, warming themselves, maybe drinking a cup of hot chocolate or something. And the impression that left on me has always remained. If I think of it, I can feel and I can sense that contentment. It doesn't take a lot of, quote, things, unquote, to bring happiness. And, going back to this verse, but godliness with contentment is great gain. Don't you be afraid to say no. Don't be afraid not to commit yourself to something that causes you to be concerned. Be careful about major decisions and don't allow yourselves to be pushed into signing a contract. And I just say, unless you've had a chance to sleep on it, and unless you've given it really, really careful thought. The salesman's always out to make the sale, and he wants it today because this is the last day we can offer this, and tomorrow it goes up 30% or whatever. And they've got that well-rehearsed line, something like that you feel you're going to miss out on the chance of a lifetime. Don't listen to that. Just think about his intention, and that intention is trying to make a sale. You think about it, you sleep on it, and if you sincerely feel that it's a good deal, whatever it may be, then think it through, and if you feel good about it, that's the time to put your signature on that bottom line for whatever you're committing yourself to. Turn to Hebrews 12, verse 1. Hebrews 12, verse 1. Wherefore, seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight. I'm going to stop at that point. That's what I want to focus on. Lay aside every weight. And it's interesting because at this time of year, when they have all the Christmas programs on, and all the TV programs are associated with Christmas, you can, in going through the various channels, very seldom during this time of year not see some part of the Christmas Carol with Charles Dickens and Scrooge and Tiny Tim and all those things. And the interesting thing about this is I thought, because I happened to see it this week, a picture of Scrooge's deceased partner, Jacob Marley, who came to visit him as a spirit, with these chains hanging around his body and with weights attached to each one of the chains and causing him to be bent over and humped over and, moving slowly, ponderously. It's funny the way it's portrayed, but that is the way that we're affected sometimes by the weight that is on our body from whatever source, whatever the stress or the pressure or the strain, it's a weight, and it affects us accordingly. Wherefore, because of all of the things you know, all of the things you've learned, all of the examples you've seen of the people in the Bible who have lived before you, have walked down different avenues, have made different decisions, you have all of these witnesses as to examples to you as to how to do things in your life. Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Well, you can't very well run a race of any kind when you've got chains hanging around your neck with cement blocks attached to them. It's just impossible. How many of us are carrying weights, obligations, problems, debts, because we have complicated our lives? You know, I can't tell you specifically, because each one of you, each one of us knows individually what steps we need to shed some of these weights. And the only reason that I mention it this time, people are talking about New Year's resolutions. But as I say, deciding to shed a weight and associating it with a resolution, other than the fact it's a good time of year because it's a new calendar, and your calendar starts January 1st, might be a good time to a target date to set. But I'm not saying that's the thing to do. It's just that since many people think about resolutions, maybe this is the time that you should give some consideration to doing something about whatever that weight is you're carrying. You know, the funny thing is, for the most part, most of us know what we need to do. You know, most of us know really deep down in our heart of hearts, we know what we need to do to get rid of that weight, whether it's giving something away, whether it's walking away from a relationship, whether it's walking away from a friendship, whether it's changing a job, whatever the case may be, we know what we need to do to get rid of that weight. God has given us that knowledge, and yet when we don't pay attention to that knowledge and we venture into no man's land, often, or yet sometimes we venture into no man's land not heeding the warning signs that are right ahead of us, that are out in front of us, that are at the end of this big, long, wide road that we were told leads to destruction. Yes, a new year is right around the corner. You know, there's no magic in that. It's simply a new month on the calendar, has no particular significance other than it can be used to mark changes in our life plan, since it coincides the calendar we use for planning purposes. I just took my old 2-year calendar out of my the little book that I use to carry it around in, and got a new one this past week, and started putting new entries and taking information that I wanted to save. But it's just a new month. There's no magic about it. You know, we receive the lion's share of the tools we need each week here when we come regularly. However, when the rubber meets the road, when push comes to shove, when you get right down to it, it's up to us if and how we choose to use them. My trip home from Pasco was a real eye-opener to me in a number of ways, all of which I didn't discuss here. There were some other things that I decided as a result. I learned some lessons from it, which I know will and should save me time in the future. When I got home and had a chance to look at my email, there was an email from Alaska Airlines telling me that I have a $150 voucher for a flight, anywhere Alaska flies during the next 12 months. And since I usually go to Los Angeles once or twice a year when we visit our son, that certainly is going to come in handy. It certainly was totally unexpected. I didn't realize they did that type of thing, although, I'm convinced it was the right thing to do. They should. But, so kudos to Alaska. Well, more than likely, we may find it necessary in 2016, in this year ahead, to make some of the significant changes in our lives that I've touched on today. I don't know what they will be. I don't know how it will affect each one of you. I'm no fortune teller. I'm no soothsayer. Have no idea. I just know they will happen. And when we start making the decisions about these changes, we need to remember Christ's warning to us and be sure, above all things, above everything else involved, be sure that we don't forget to count the cost.